Texas, USA, 2021. Inside a company called Colonial Pipeline, one of the biggest oil companies in the world, the employees started their work as usual. However, unbeknownst to them, hackers paralyzed their operating systems after silently infiltrating their networks for years using data leaked into the dark web. The employees found a note left by the hackers demanding a sum of 75 Bitcoin, which at the time was around 4.4 million US dollars, in exchange for the decryption of the files. Unlike other hacks, this one would actually have a devastating real-world impact on the US economy, which required the involvement of the FBI and the CISA to use smart tactics to bring these hackers down.
We are deeply sorry for the impact that this attack had. DarkSide demanded a financial payment in exchange for a key to unlock the impacted systems. We had cyber defenses in place.
Squawk, the largest U.S. fuel pipeline, is now the victim of a ransomware attack, and Brian Sullivan has the latest on the
Colonial Pipeline.
Colonial Pipeline.
Colonial Pipeline. Colonial Pipeline.
Colonial Pipeline.
On Thursday, May 6, 2021, a group of hackers that call themselves DarkSide were hiding in the shadows of Colonial Pipeline. DarkSide found about the existence of a virtual private network, or VPN for short. It was set up by the company employees so they can remotely access the main network. To access this VPN, an account affiliated with the network is required. Fortunately for the hackers, they didn't need to do much, as they found in the deep web a key that will be able to easily crack the private network. Apparently, the company was hit years ago with an unrelated data breach. Some information about the company was leaked to the deep web, including the login credentials to the VPN, which belonged to an ex-employee. The account happened to still be a member of the VPN and did not have multi-factor authentication, so only the username and password is needed to log in. They made their way into the main network and started moving laterally, scanning for any sensitive or important information that could help them take control over the network, rendering them hard to detect and giving them more control over the main server. From that point, they moved across Colonial Pipeline's IT systems and exfiltrated over 100 gigabytes worth of sensitive files that can potentially be used in the future. After that, they injected the server veins with what they initially came to do. They installed malware in the company's network and launched it. The malware that they installed started spreading across the network and into the operating systems of the computers, encrypting the files and locking them away from being accessible. The day after, on May 7th, when the employees showed up to work, they couldn't properly use the computers since all the files were locked away, but they managed to find a note left by the hackers. After reading it, they identified it as a ransom note since it was demanding a sum of 75 Bitcoin, the equivalent of 4.4 million US dollars at the time, in exchange for the decryption of the files. But something peculiar stood out in that note. It was signed under the name DarkSide.
DarkSide demanded a financial payment in exchange for a key to unlock the impacted systems. I made the decision to pay, and I made the decision to keep the information about the payment as confidential as
O'Neill
possible.
said they shut it down proactively to, quote, contain the threat. We just don't know what the threat was.
The company had to take quick action, so they shut off all their productions to avoid further spread of the ransomware and to prevent the operational systems from being affected. For the first time since the company was founded, Colonial Pipelines halted operations. Immediately they contacted help, getting in touch with the FBI and CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. In addition, they hired FireEye, an intel security company, to investigate and try to understand what exactly the hackers used, and to track down DarkSide and their whereabouts. Colonial Pipelines remained out of operations for a few days, while forensic research and investigations were being conducted, which means they were unable to send oil supplies to their clients, so the situation escalated when the news spread. But this came at a cost. US citizens from the East Coast started panic buying gas and storing it due to the price increase that happens because supply did not meet the demand. The question now is, how long would they continue to ignore the demands of the hackers? Apparently, not so long. Joseph Blunt, the CEO of Colonial Pipelines, decided to give up and pay the ransom money of 75 Bitcoin. The hackers in exchange sent them the decryption tool, but there was a catch. To add salt to injury, the tool was not very effective because it was very slow, so the company ended up restoring systems from backups instead. A few days later, on May 12th, Colonial Pipelines resumed production and fuel distribution. The US government issued emergency fuel transport alternatives to help deal with the panic buying craze. The money was paid, but the decryption tool was not very functional. It was marked as a defeat for Colonial Pipelines and a victory for DarkSide, or so they thought. In reality, accepting to pay the ransom was not admitting defeat, it was a bait. The FBI was carefully observing and tracing the transaction. They traced the ransom payment through the Bitcoin blockchain, which led them to the receiving end. They identified it as a wallet linked to the DarkSide group, and upon further investigations, they found out the whereabouts of the hacking group. They turned out to be based in Russia, and they were not any typical hacking group. They operated a business called Ransomware as a Service. Basically, they create ransomware and then rent it. The FBI kept pushing and managed to obtain a private key to the wallet linked to DarkSide and managed to retrieve 63.7 Bitcoin before they completely lost track of DarkSide. Suspecting that the Russian government is involved in this attack, the US government had to get involved. Russia denied being affiliated with the group, and the lack of evidence that can prove Russia is behind them did not help. But since DarkSide was situated in Russia, their authorities had a responsibility to deal with it because it was a threat coming from their country. DarkSide released a statement clarifying that the attack was not ordered by the Russian government. Their motives were not to attack and create societal or economical issues like the crisis that occurred, but their goal is to make money. The statement was not convincing and pushed the US to pressure Russian authorities, who ended up pressuring DarkSide to cease their operations from their country. And this led the hacking group to completely shut down on May 14, 2021. This taught the company a good lesson to put more effort into cybersecurity. They implemented multi-factor authentication for all remote access points to prevent the same situation from happening again. They even added cybersecurity to employees' training to prepare them in case a similar situation happens and to deal with it before it escalates. The US government took this as a chance to update cybersecurity regulations for critical infrastructure. Although DarkSide was shut down and disbanded, some of their members reprised their work under different ransomware groups like Black Cat and Black Matter. DarkSide proved to be rather dangerous and very cunning in their ways of hacking. They would use anything they could get their hands on to achieve their goals without paying attention to the consequences, and in this case, causing a huge oil crisis in the US East Coast. And they proved even further that big companies like Colonial Pipelines, which is one of the largest companies in the US, can have a very fragile cybersecurity system that can be easily penetrated, especially if it isn't monitored. This was just one of the hijacking stunts that happened in recent years, but there is a lot more that we can talk about on this channel, in addition to heists, hijackings, and prison escapes. So if you like this content, please subscribe to Fleeced to help us make better content.